This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine. I won't let anybody blow it out. No, I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah, I won't let anybody blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine. I won't let anybody blow it out. Oh, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, yeah.
Thanks for busting my groove, man.
I burst your bubble. That's my.
You got mad skills, man. Mad skills.
I do. One of them is not keeping people's bubbles intact. Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We thank you for tuning in to this, our regular podcast. You were just listening to David Wimbush of the Collection Band. You can check out his music and music from all of our contributors at our website, moonshinejesus.podbean.com. And as always, we have the indomitable Mark Sandlin with us. How you doing, Mark?
I'm getting used to being called indomitable. Although I do feel sort of like a snowman or a snow monster every time.
That's abominable.
Oh, I kind of like that word.
I can take you down, man.
But I sort of feel like that guy now. So I don't know. I was digging on it, man. Thanks for busting my groove, man.
I burst your bubble. That's my skill.
You got mad skills, man. Mad skills.
I do. One of them is not keeping people's bubbles intact. Anyway,
I'm gonna call you from now on. Your new nickname's BB, Bubble Buster.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that.
Yeah.
I'll get that tattooed. On my next birthday.
Perfect.
Right over my heart, BB. So anyway, we've got fall coming up, winter coming up.
Yes.
We both live in North Carolina. The weather's beginning to turn.
Absolutely.
I have been wearing my Moonshine Jesus hoodie. I'm not sure about you.
Have you really? It's not cold enough for me yet, but I will be because, man, no joke, best hoodie ever.
Yeah. So you can get one at moonshinejesus.getstock.com. They're fantastic hoodies. Sport your moonshiner gear. And Mark,
and you know what, David? You know what? I am going to re-release our Shine Jesus Shine T-shirt this week because I've had a few requests come in. So just look on our Facebook page or my personal Facebook page,
or our Twitter,
and you'll see the link there, so you can get yours. I'm telling you, you will be floored at the number of people who want to talk to you about that shirt when you're wearing it.
Yeah, for those of you who are actually brave enough to wear it outside of the Wild Goose.
I wear it everywhere. I was in San Francisco this past week, and the number of people, strangers, who stopped me dead in my tracks because they wanted to talk to me about how cool that shirt was.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, if you're wondering why we're a little late and why we've been a little sporadic over the last couple of weeks, it has been because Mark's been traveling and doing some really cool work with San Francisco Theological Seminary. So he won't brag on himself, so I'll do it. But he's doing some great work with that seminary out there, and apparently getting tours from listeners and readers and all this other kind of great stuff.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to the listeners who gave me the real tour of San Francisco while I was there. I cannot tell you how.
Hey, look. I lived in the East Bay. You probably know more about San Francisco than I do.
I'm telling you, the people could not have been more inviting and hospitable to me. I was just floored by how wonderful everybody was. So thanks to each of you who helped me and spent some time with me. I really had a blast.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And I lived in the Bay Area for a good 5-6 years. Miss it dearly. So I was insanely jealous of you when you were posting all these photos of my favorite places in the world. But then I went hiking and I was like, okay, at least I have mountains.
That's right. I tell you, I fell in love with San Francisco. That is an amazing town. Amazing town.
It is an amazing town. If it didn't have earthquakes and an incredibly high standard of living, it would be a great place for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And the standard of living is, you know what? I could go on about that forever, but we should probably start a show. What do you think?
Well, we actually have a really cool show. Occasionally, Mark and I get a chance to see a movie before it comes out. And these are usually movies that have a spiritual or religious or an ethical component.
Right.
We've done Calvary. We've done God's Not Dead. No, I'm just kidding. We didn't do God's Not Dead.
We've done Fury. We've had some great stuff. I even got to go over and see the filming of Anne Rice's new over to Rome and see the filming of that, thanks to your connections.
Yeah, absolutely. So
and you're going to go see the final cut today, right?
Yeah, we're gonna maybe go see that and maybe see what we can do with that. But what I want to talk about is what we've already seen, because I think I used to love documentaries and I used to watch them all the time. And I loved Inconvenient Truth, like a lot of good progressives and liberals.
Oh yeah.
And so this is a documentary we got to see by the director of Inconvenient Truth,
exactly.
David Guggenheim, about one of the great humanitarian stories of the 21st century in a way.
Completely. I mean, this is going to be fun to talk about. There's so much to unpack about this movie.
There's so many angles. So it's the story. It's a documentary about Malala. And if you don't know, Malala was the young girl who was shot by the Taliban in Swat Valley, and survived and has become an international advocate for women's rights and equality and education for young girls.
Right.
Which is what she was shot over. And so this is a film that kind of covers a little bit of the story about what led up to that, but also a lot of what has happened since then. So it kind of gives a picture of where she is now. We pretty much are familiar with Malala's backstory, but this documentary even adds more stuff to it that makes it more dynamic.
It makes it unbelievably dynamic. You get the real life backstory to what's going on, but also the film very quietly kind of puts some interesting conflict that you probably hadn't thought about, that this is all rising out of, and kind of gives our context in the U.S. some a mirror image from what's happening in a completely different place, and makes commentary on kind of what we're all dealing with. So, and then we'll get into all of this, but it's a fascinating film and really adeptly handled.
It is very adeptly handled. I highly recommend this film, especially for churches, and especially for churches who are involved in interfaith work. Absolutely. Or interested in interfaith work. This is one of those things, like, there are lots of Christian movies out right now. Like there's The War Room, and then there's more coming out. I can't remember all of them, but there's a lot of these movies that churches go and see en masse.
And they shouldn't be. And they shouldn't be.
Exactly. These are terrible movies to go see. This is a movie that can challenge worldviews. It can challenge it can inspire in a way. I'm a very cynical person. I don't know if anybody's noticed.
No. Say it ain't so, David. Say it ain't so.
And so I went into this movie going, I know this story.
Right.
I'm familiar with this story.
Right.
This is going to be really boring. And I was very cynical about the experience. And I left that movie, and I remarked to the person I went with, I said, I'm a really cynical person. But even I felt hopeful after this movie. I felt like something can change after you watch this movie.
Absolutely. And, I think there's going to be a lot of progressives who show up to the movie feeling exactly that way. I know there's stories, so it'll be interesting to see what they do with it. But from the very moment it begins with these unbelievable graphics and the telling of the story behind her name, I think that was a brilliant move, because a lot of the folks, like I said, that are going to go see us are progressive liberals like us, who are going to feel like they know what's going on. And from the beginning, visually, he hooks you in, and he starts telling you a story you didn't know. Exactly,
and it's a great animation sequence, and I don't want to really tell you what the actual story is.
Absolutely
because it kind of weaves throughout the movie. But it's a beautiful way to introduce you to it, and it weaves this idea of myth and reality together, and myth affecting reality in a really interesting way, because a certain kind of myth has built up around Malala in a lot of ways. A certain kind of iconography, a certain kind of almost saint-like qualities. And one of the great things about this film is it starts in this really iconic place, and then it moves into this really mundane human place, kind of deconstructing some of like our preconceived notions about Malala, international human rights activist, right?
I completely agree. It's one of the strengths of this movie is that she has become an icon, and it's important. Icons matter. Icons matter. But he also immediately breaks it down. But basically, and this isn't giving anything away, goes into her home life and has just the normal brothers giving her crap, and just it's brilliant. It's beautiful.
When he interviews the brothers of Malala about who Malala is, and they're talking about how she's this international activist for peace, and they're like, but we don't really think she's for peace because she beats us up.
She beats us up.
Great, this is so perfect, because it puts her as like just a normal everyday human being. That and her experiences in school as an immigrant now,
right? And I think that's important, because one of the things it does is it constantly recognizes that she is an icon. It also constantly recognizes that she is very normal and very human, which there's a lot of hope in that, because each one of us can identify with that side of her. And so it's inspiring to think that person who I identify with can be this icon.
Absolutely, because you've got her splice, like, I'm studying for finals and struggling with my math, and then visiting world leaders and telling them to speak up for women's rights.
Giving speeches at the UN.
And then not doing well in school. Like,
for some reason in our head, but she loves school.
She loves school, but, and she does well in school, but, like, she has room for improvement because of language barriers and all this other kind of good stuff, or bad stuff, if you will. But to see the juxtaposition of her struggling with her math exam and then, like, going to talk to world leaders and saying, this is what you need to be talking about, and this is how you need to stand up for women and young girls around the world, is an incredibly empowering moment, because as a youth minister recently, I had students who were struggling with math tests, and it's amazing to think about the power of young people when they speak up and when they stand on the side of equality.
Yeah, well, we live in a world that tries to convince you that it's only the people with the great grades and only the people places of privilege that are ever going to be able to make an impact or a difference. And in a lot of ways, kids who don't do well in school are encouraged to not speak up and to let the other kids do it. And this is a movie that almost argues the opposite. It's like she talks about how much her dad started a school, and we'll get to, I think in the next section we should talk a lot more about her dad. But But she talks about how he started school and how she grew up in school, and school was her home, and how much she loves to read. Matter of fact, there's one great kind of this two-sidedness of the story where they're interviewing her brother, and he says, "I think she's addicted to her books," and the interviewer, and then he says, like from 5 in the afternoon to 11 at night, she does her homework, and the reporter asks her brother why, and the brother says, "I don't know." Like, he's like, I think she's crazy, And so there's this build up. She's so dedicated to her books. Why? I don't know. It's crazy if you ask me.
There's one moment where I feel like her humanity shines through in a really different way. She went through something so traumatic that most people will never go through, and she survived it, and it's amazing. And what's interesting is how little she's willing to talk about it. There's a moment in the film where the interviewer asks some really pointed questions about that experience of suffering and pain, and she becomes really quiet, and there seems to be almost a reluctant to kind of go there in a way. And I'm not sure if that's a coping mechanism. I'm not sure if that's something that's too private for her or whatnot, whatever. But there's a really human moment to me when she remembers this thing that has launched her into human rights activism across the world, is also something that still evidently is a really painful place for her. And seeing the therapy that she's continuing to go through and all that as a kind of a constant reminder of that, to me, showed the power of woundedness, and also that unwillingness to talk about it is a very human thing, and a place where we can maybe identify with her.
Yeah, I think it's also that and this is a great tie-in to our next segment, where we can maybe start talking about her dad a little bit, who's a very important part of this film, and part of her life. I think it's also that it's a very complicated situation for their family in that they have to kind of deconstruct what happened because we want to blame a person with a gun.
Right.
And that's not what they do. And I'm going to leave it right there. We're going to drop some
Right.
tunes. We'll come back and talk specifically about what that might mean.
Moonshine Jesus, nobody in the sky. Moonshine Jesus, baby, alright. Moonshine Jesus, a surprising delight. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello, and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You're joining us for round two. Listen, David, when we stopped in the last one, I kind of did a little bit of a tease about how the family understands.
You are such a tease.
I know. That's
I'm
me.
looking at you right now, man, and you're such a tease. You have your vestments hanging up in the background, man.
I was trying to haunt you with those. But listen, we were talking about how Malala really doesn't speak much of the tragic event that kind of pushed her to go even further than she was already going. Because I mean, we need to be clear, and you mentioned this, is that the Taliban sought her out when they came into that school bus. They asked for her because of the work she was already doing and trying to speak up for how important it is that women be offered the opportunity to be educated.
She'd already been speaking out. It's not like that she, suddenly became a spokesperson.
That's
for
exactly
this
right.
She was targeted because she was becoming a spokesperson.
Exactly, and all that they actually ended up doing was inspiring her more. And I think one of the reasons that they don't speak out is because there's so much unpacking that they would have to do because of the way they understand this. In this movie, I don't remember the exact question, but the person who's kind of doing the interview asked the question, who was it that shot Malala? Or what person shot Malala? And Malala's dad answers by saying, it was not a person, it was an ideology.
Right.
And I think that's part of what's going on, is that there's so much unpacking that has to happen to even talk about the event, and they seem to be much more interested in focusing on moving forward and what good we can do in the world rather than dwelling on this ideology and unpacking all of that and how it led to the events. I don't know. And I think it's a good way for us to start talking about the influence of her dad, because I think that's really insightful, and it's very clearly how Malala also understands what happened.
You see direct parallels between her and her dad, and I think it's fair to say she's deeply influenced by her dad and the way.
And her dad was deeply influenced by her grandfather.
Right.
They all spoke out. I mean, there's this wonderful thing, and this isn't much of a spoiler. If you don't want any spoilers, put it on pause for 30 seconds or mute for 30 seconds. Her dad had a history of speaking out, even though he had a stutter.
Exactly. Exactly. And he kept doing it, and he kept doing it until he found his voice.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what this movie is about. In a lot of ways, I think this movie is about her dad.
Absolutely.
More than her.
I was going to say the same thing. A huge portion, especially the middle part of it, focuses on his history and his story, and about kind of the creation of his schools. And one of the things that he actually says is that he wants to put in students' minds the idea to rebel against tradition and customs and to learn to raise their voices against that kind of oppression.
Exactly.
And so as the Taliban is coming to power, and the interviewer's talking to him and about where he was during that moment, he says that he felt like that if he didn't speak up, he would be the most guilty and most sinful person in the world. And that's a quote from him that I wrote down because I was thinking how amazing that is to frame wrongdoing in the unwillingness to stand up for equality and justice.
Absolutely.
And it was just an amazing moment of strength and character for this man.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the story that starts unfolding in that middle section is this, what I saw as a tension between two traditions. The conservative tradition of the Taliban and the education-focused tradition of her family. And her father says, education gives you the power to question things, the power to challenge things, to be independent. And so when he said that, I realized that part of what they were doing was setting up this, that education is a challenge to the Taliban. And that's kind of where I start seeing these parallels between what's going on there and what's going on in the U.S. as we start seeing the Republican Party in particular trying to deconstruct a lot of the educational systems that are out there and trying to dummy them down, even introduce into them pseudosciences and all of this kind of stuff. So I didn't expect to go and get a commentary on what's going on in the U.S. And I think that's part of what was going on. It's a very sub thing. It's not the primary about what's going on there.
Yeah.
But there's,
I see what you're saying.
And it feels intentional. Honestly, it feels intentional.
I did not pick up on the same thing, but I'm not saying it's not there. But I didn't pick up on the same thing. But you're right though that there is that connection there to kind of how. I mean, what's going on in our country is not nearly as regressive as what's going on.
No, it's not.
Is what happened, and I don't want to equate.
And that's what I was saying. That's what I was saying by saying it was just a subtext. A matter of fact, if anything, it's saying here's these folks that you absolutely hate. How is what you're doing not the beginning of that?
But exactly. I think one of the powerful points of what you're making is that they show kind of the beginning formations of the Taliban. And what you see is a very subtle shift that eventually begins to happen. It starts out with this guy speaking directly to women.
Yep.
And in my Western mind, I'm going, okay, this is kind of neat. He's speaking directly to women
right.
and how radical this must be in this time. And then you realize that the message begins to shift until it becomes the Taliban. And you go from someone who's addressing the issues facing women on the radio in Pakistan to
right.
burning televisions and repressive policies. And it shows you that the Taliban didn't start out as this massively evil force. It started as this subtle ideology that became
right.
more and more and more of a vote. And you're right that right now we are seeing a shift from a subtle, racist, subtle, anti-poor person ideology becoming more
right.
and more overt.
Exactly.
In our GOP election. So,
yeah.
I mean, I totally get what you're saying.
I really think that was part of the story, and that's part of why it kept popping up for me it almost pointing to us saying, can you not see you're in the early stages of what's going on here? Because exactly like you said, the Taliban, the more powerful they got, the more conservative they got. And we're seeing the beginnings of that.
Well, and we associate the Taliban with things like the shooting of Malala, which is
right.
or with it, right or wrong, we associate it with 9/11 and Bin Laden, which you can make the argument that anyway. But you associate it with these moments of dramatic violence and dramatic horribleness, basically.
Right.
What we don't see and don't think about often is how that came to be in very small ways. It didn't start out at that point.
No, right. And I think ultimately, though, what both of those things do in terms of her dad and the education and how he started schools and taught all of his kids the importance of that, and particularly Malala, I think what we see is we end up with a story that's about the power of tradition for both good and bad.
Yeah.
I think that's a strong theme of what's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you've got her. I mean, she's very much a product. She's not anti-Islamic. I mean,
no.
she's not. And I mean, you see them in that cultural framework. You don't see them outside of that cultural framework.
Right.
I think it's a good lesson for especially Westerners to be able to see that family as valuing education, to be able to see that family as within the Islamic tradition, not necessarily standing outside of it.
Yeah. I think definitely it does. I think I think that it definitely not only puts them within it, but it gives the opportunity for it to be the
animating factor in a way.
Right.
And animating factor.
Right. And it reframes what our Western minds have been taught about what Islam's about. At one point, Malala says, Islam teaches us humanity, equality, forgiveness.
I just turned to that exact page of my notes.
Right.
Because for her, that's what Islam is about.
Exactly.
It's about, because she talks about never feeling angry about what happened to her.
That's exactly right.
How Islam teaches all these things. And so what a great moment if you're with church people or Christian folks or non-religious people to talk about how faiths are many things.
Yeah.
and how we can choose the best of our fates or the worst of our fates.
Exactly. So listen, we've talked about lots of things that we think are part of the movie and what it's about, but ultimately it really is about the power of education, the power of speaking up, and how important it is to speak up on social justice issues.
And particularly the education of women.
Exactly. So I'd like to, since we've wasted about half an hour of people's time, not quite, we're going to have another drop and have a little fun, but just so we can get to our hashtag game, I want to close this section off with a quote from Malala from her UN speech. It's actually the very end of her UN speech. She says, "Dear brothers and sisters, we must not forget that millions of people are suffering from poverty, injustice, and ignorance. We must not forget that millions of children are out of schools. We must not forget that our sisters and brothers are waiting for a bright, peaceful future. So let us wage a global struggle against illiteracy, poverty, and terrorism. And let us pick up our books and pens. They are our most powerful weapons."
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome back to round 3 of the Moonshine Jesus Show. We have been talking about the film He Named Me Malala, which comes out in October. We highly recommend you go see it. It's a great film. It will leave you hopeful, maybe in a few tears. But there are other things in the world that don't leave you so hopeful, and one of those is the GOP primary. Right, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. The debate, as we record this, debate was on last night.
Yep.
I understand it went on for 3 hours. Yay, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. So, okay. So we hammer on and on about like Trump and the GOP, and let's just be clear that somebody in this podcast was really surprised that Trump was the front runner, and then somebody said that Trump was the absolute perfect front runner.
True enough.
So, what we were thinking was, what would happen if we smashed Trump with the film we've been talking about with Malala? Like, what would happen if Trump interviewed or described Malala? Like, what would that be like?
Right. I mean, it's very clear from some of the other things that he said that he definitely would not have much liking for Malala because she got shot.
Yeah, she got shot in the head.
She got shot. Why would you have someone leading you that got shot in the head?
I want somebody who shoots other people.
That's exactly right.
If I was Malala, I would have fired back.
Yep. You're basically trumping her, is what you're doing. You're So that would be. I think that would be a lot of fun, just to take any kind of iconic leader and give Trump's perspective on them, which is basically to use what makes them iconic and tear them apart over it.
Harriet Tubman, what a loser. I would have built that railroad above ground and with real trains. Walking on foot? No, the Trump rides on trains.
That's right. It would have been the most beautiful train. No.
It would have been made of solid gold.
It would be huge. It would be huge. Just huge.
All I do is win.
I think this could be brilliant. I think this could be so much fun. So, Trump on iconic leaders. Let that be the hashtag?
Hashtag Trump on iconic leaders.
Absolutely perfect. I cannot wait. I think this is going to just be brilliant. So, hey, moonshiners, bring it.
We will be active on Twitter this week. We promise, retweeting whatever you guys send our way.
Absolutely. And you know what? Now we actually have wasted a perfectly good half hour of your time. So, David, what say we leave them with what they really came here for?
Of course, a little Freddie Fry.
Moonshine and Jesus, there's gold in them hills. Keep them all happy, cure all their ills. Moonshine and Jesus, grapes on the vine. Moonshine and Jesus, make them feel fine.